The elves that now reside in the reclusive kingdom of Ios have their origins in eastern Immoren, where these people had a particularly close relationship with their gods. Elven legends do not contradict the creation myths of Menites or Thunians, but instead stand apart from them. The close relationship between the elves and their creators allow elven civilization to quickly flourish. While elves did not predate humanity, elven civilization spread across eastern Immoren and reached great heights before humans even mastered basic architecture and masonry. The oldest legends of elves do not speak of the world's creation, but rather of the divine court of Laios, which came into being in a spiritual realm they call the Veld, believed by human theologians to be an isolated area of Urkane. Amid the Veld, the palace Laios was erected to house the gods and their created servants. 8 in number, the gods are associated with the cycle and passages of time. The origin of these gods has been attributed to the mingling between the sun and other celestial bodies like the moons. The elven gods work together to ensure the security of their realm and to build a lasting domain amid the wilds. They arrived at a hierarchy based on their respective powers and capabilities. First among them, and a leader of the gods, was Lasir, the Narcissar of Ages. At her side was the Incisar of Hours, Osiris, described both as her cohort. At her side was the Incisor of Hours, Osiris, described as both consort and co-ruler. That these gods waged war on the primal beasts beyond their domain is demonstrated by the titles taken by the gods. Osiris was also the sovereign of conflict and general of Laios. Next in the divine hierarchy was Islista and Nairo, she the nice Aesir of night, as well as the watcher of the gates, he the Aesir of day, Seneschal and lorekeeper. Vigilance was their charge, alternating day and night. Last of the 4 gods were of the seasons, Syra, the Nicisor of spring and healer of the divine court, Lunasar, Aesir of summer, arms master of Laios and chief of scouts, Lytlisa, Nicisor of autumn, court assassin and mistress of poisons, and Nisor, sire of winter and grand crafter. It was Lunasar whose responsibility it was to scout far afield of the Veld, who first observed mortal souls spilling into the remote wilds. Reporting this discovery to Lasir, the Nicisor of Ages followed the origins of these souls back to Cain. There she witnessed the barbarity of mortal existence. Seeing the trials and tribulations undertaken by these short-lived creatures, she was amazed how their difficulties strengthened their spiritual essence, which in turn strengthened the gods with whom they were linked to. She became aware of the ecology of souls and saw how her court could benefit from the creation of a race bound to their worship. Elven legends insist that their creation was a refinement whereupon the crude and bestial shapes of other mortals were exceeded by their own forms, as Lysir committed to the exhausting birth of the elven race. Syra was the midwife of this genesis, and so too did each of the gods play their part, linking their lives to their creation, to the cycles of the season and the passage of night and day by the sequence of hours. The elves that were birthed from Lasir's labors would possess greater longevity, enlightenment, and other gifts that the previous races lacked. The elves spread quickly across eastern Immoren and proved their superiority to the other creatures that sought to thrive there. When Lasir was assured that her creations were of the quality she sought, she made herself known to them and provided the wisdom of the divine court, offering arcane secrets necessary so they could surpass all of their rivals. The dwarves of Rule have their own creation myths as well. The dwarves believe their flesh is directly descended from their gods, who were their actual and literal progenitors, called the Great Fathers. They came into being in a place called Crag Dorgun, which translates as the land beneath. Human theologians consider this simply another way to describe Urkane, similar to how the elves describe the Veld. The origins of the Great Fathers rests with a living mountain and god named Gore, the greatest and tallest mountain in Crag Dorgun, which towered higher than any peak on Cain. This god mountain was of tremendous power and deep-rooted malevolence. By his size and scope, he was impervious to everything that walked, flew, or swam. Yet Gore was alone and sought distraction from those who could marvel at and appreciate his majesty. He searched within his bulk and drew from within it 13 of the finest crystals of his essence and carved these into shapes that pleased him, intended to be used as slaves. Gore bound them in shackles and taught the stone-born creatures that they must obey or be swallowed up and ground into nothingness. The 13 slaves created by Gore have been credited with clever hands, sharp eyes, and knew all that could be known of shaping of stone and of metal. Gore desired they should build a great monument to his immortal glory. What Gore did not realize is that they were not merely mindless slaves, but each had within him a spark of divinity. Almost at once, the 13 began to dream of freedom. The names of the 13 slaves that would become the Great Fathers are as follows: Dorg, Dol, Dovor, Durg, Dol, Dovor, Gerd, Godor, Horod, Jador, Ludhur, Ordum, Orm, Sigmur, Udo, and Uldar. Each in time would prove mastery over certain tasks and establish his own destiny. In the early days, they were defined by only the oppression of Gore and the shackles that bound them. While tasked to construct the great monument, the 13 discovered a true love of working stone and metal and a perfectionism that would allow for nothing less than their best work, despite the hatred they bore for their master. They toiled for years, crafting the most glorious tribute they could imagine to immortalize the mountain god. But when they presented it to Gore, the cruel mountain god mocked their achievement and unleashed a heaving earthquake to crack the earth and swallow their work. Gore demanded that they commence again and do better. Knowing Gore's complaints were baseless, the 13 cleared the foundation and began to build anew, toiling this time for decades to create a work which would be unquestionably superior. By the end of their labors, they had come to love their new creation. Even this was not good enough for the tyrant, who pulverized their work to sand and dust, demanding they build again. The 13 despaired. More than enslavement, they could not bear watching their work be destroyed again. It was Orm, who would one day become the patron of masonry and building, who called his brothers together and devised the plan to destroy Gore and thereby set themselves free. They would appeal to the mountain god's vanity and find a way to build something that he could not bear to destroy. Godor, who would become the patron of orators, was enlisted to propose to Gore a tower so high it would touch the skies to the land beneath. The only difficulty being such an engineering feat would require materials extracted from Gore's own body. Gore was enthralled with the idea and consented to contribute to the work. Dol, who would become the patron of mining, led the efforts of the 13, proving his talent with pick and shovel and his deep knowledge of stone. Gerd, who would become patron of wealth, showed an affinity for following veins of precious ore and discovering pockets of crystals. The 13 set about this task with all their pride and ingenuity, performing feats of engineering far advanced than anything witnessed before. Meanwhile, the 13 mined a labyrinth of caves within Gore, extracting the best stone and the richest veins of metal. Lodhul, who would become patron of feasts, distracted Gore by hosting great gatherings of supplicants while his brothers weakened the mountain god from within, preparing the mountain to collapse. As Gore became hollow and weaker with time, the tower grew ever taller. Countless seasons passed as the 13th committed to this task, and as the tower became the promised marvel, climbing to scrape the sky. The mountain god was transfixed, basked in the adoration of petitioners who came to lavish praise upon the construction, which he accepted as his due. Jador and Ordum, patrons of espionage and secrets, listened and learned to all they could of Gor's deepest secrets, as well as the world beyond their prison. At last, the 13 reached the end of their work. As soon as they laid the last stone of the spire in its place, they set their plan in motion. They shattered the columns beneath the mountain, beginning the rumblings of the great collapse of Gor. The thunderous din could be heard across Crag Dorgun as Gor's immortal life was extinguished in an ever-widening cloud of dust and stone as the cave-riddled mountain fell inward. When the rumbling finished, the great mountain of Crag Dorgun collapsed to become gentle hills near where the monument stood that would outlast it. This was the Tower of Gorfell, symbol of the Great Fathers and heart of the domain of the Ruic gods. As soon as Gor fell, great monsters of the periphery of Crag Dorgun intruded, seeking to seize the lands for themselves. The Great Father Dovor forged weapons for which to confront them, while Uldar forged armor to protect his brothers. After girding themselves, Dorg, Horud, and Udor respectively took up axes and hammers to wage war and to secure their borders. After having fought to earn an era of peace, the Great Father Dol, who had been mining below the ruins of Gord, discovered an endless chasm. Making his brothers aware of this and feeling overcome by curiosity, the Great Fathers traveled through and emerged on Cain, the land of the living. On witnessing the proliferation of life, they were inspired to leave their mark on the world, as well as find companionship to end their lonely fraternal existence. As they were birthed from stone, they sought to find equals in the earth, and so gathered the rich and fertile clay from the Air's River, which flowed into what would become Lake Armsdeep among the great glass peaks, and from this they shaped the Clay Wives. These would become the matriarchs of the Ruic people. As for the Great Fathers and the Clay Wives were sired the first generation of dwarves in the ancient legendary days of the world's beginning. For a time, the Great Fathers and the Clay Wives lived amongst the first dwarven clans, which took their names from their divine progenitors. The Great Fathers passed down the knowledge and lore they had acquired both during their enslavement and after. Most important, the Great Fathers delivered the edicts from which their lives should be governed. This would include the following core aspects of dwarven culture. The Edict of Authority, which outlines the family hierarchy of the clan. The Edict of Building, establishing the importance of crafting and construction. The Edict of Duels, describing the right to resolve disputes through physical confrontation. The Edict of Feuds, with laws for larger conflicts between entire clans. The Edict of Oaths, which defines the importance of sworn promises. The Edict of Ownership, giving each dwarf the right to own that which he created, trade for, have been freely given, or won by lawful duel or feud. And the Edict of Unity, binding the dwarves to unite against external threats. From these first fundamental edicts grew the Codex, which would become the written record and body of law for the Ruic people, and the only unbroken record that has persisted from these ancient times into the modern day. The Codex and the edicts would become not only the foundation for the Ruic society, but also the holy text by which the wisdom of the Great Fathers was preserved. The Great Fathers knew they had to return to Crag Dorgun, for which they had left unprotected. The Clay Wives went with them, and so the progenitors of the dwarven peoples descended into the caverns below the earth to return to the land beneath, never again stepping foot on the surface of Cain. Their legacy was assured by the thriving and prospering dwarven clans, beginning with the 13 most directly associated with each of the fathers, as well as a proliferation of lesser clans that broke away from these first families to establish dynasties among the Glass Peaks. The Great Fathers are remembered by the people they had sired in services and prayers. Each soul was promised a place in Crag Dorgun after death, where they would join the Great Fathers at the Tower of Gorfell and eternally refine themselves and their avocations. With the exception of Rule, all the peoples of Immoren, west and east, include in their legends a period of tribal existence before the onset of true civilization. This period includes many myths and legends depicting direct interactions with the gods. It is believed the tribal period of the elves was quite different from that experienced by either humanity or Trollkin. Elves organized into small city-states that periodically warred upon one another, but possessed many advantages and an advanced understanding of mathematics, philosophy, and the arcane. The elves also had a short tribal period before the intervention leading to the rise of their civilization. Theirs would be the first great civilization upon Immoren, but also the first to fall. Ruic priests of the Great Fathers insist their massive codex, itself a vast library including ancient tomes as well as modern legal decisions, includes written records tracing back to the origins of the first clans and the words of the Great Fathers themselves. No outsider has been given access to the most ancient of sacred texts to confirm this boast. The information contained in these tomes is narrowly focused on the events within the Glass Peaks, and therefore is of limited use to the more far-flung neighboring cultures sharing the continent. Mennonites believe humanity may have continued in barbarity indefinitely if not for the gifts of Menoth. How long humanity existed in this perpetual turmoil before Menoth put aside his battle with the worm is unknowable, but is thought to be many thousands of years ago. While Menoth's wrath at having been forgotten was fierce, his rage diminished upon witnessing the harsh indignities of life for the human tribes. Those who begged his forgiveness he treated with mercy and benevolence. He consented to bestow upon them gifts forming the foundation of Mennonite civilization: the flame, the wall, the sheaf, and the law. The flame embodies many principles of the Mennonite faith, including faith and the legacy of the temple to preserve and teach religious doctrine, but it also represents the use of fire to drive back the darkness, as well as to forge weapons and survive in the harsh wilds and winters. The wall represents knowledge of masonry and engineering, whereby the first permanent townships and fortifications were erected as shelter, and also to divide settled lands from the wilderness. The sheaf is knowledge of agriculture, whereupon settled tribes began to till the earth, sow seeds, irrigate, and harvest grain to support larger populations. It also represents the use of herds of cattle animals, which would in time give rise to horses used as steeds and oxen to pull heavy loads, allowing Mennonite civilization to prosper against rivals. The law is deemed the greatest of the gifts, representing the compact between Menoth and humanity, as well as the agreements by which mankind settled into castes and combined settled tribes to create the very first cities. Legends that predate writing do not define specific laws employed by the earliest and now forgotten civilizations. The eldest compact between Menoth and mankind defined how religious rulers were to be legitimized and sanctified by the priest caste. To the priests fell the responsibility of conducting burial rites to speed souls of the dead to Menoth's side in Urkane, there to join the Creator in his war of souls. Hello fellow Warmahorde fans, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe below, and hit that bell notification to let you know when I drop my next video. Also, if you're still new to Warmahordes, make sure to check out my other Warmahorde lore videos found in both the description and on screen. Thank you and enjoy your day.